NBAA-BACE 2019. Today we've got one of the most important sessions that I think we've had in the history of business aviation right here, right now. Because it takes us from where we are right here, right now, and hopefully gets us where we need to go faster and more efficiently than we've ever gotten there before. The point of today's session is to bring some of the top people in our industry, representatives of all of phases of flight, and bring them here today to talk about the issue of sustainability. Now, this is an issue that has long been fundamental to business aviation operations. As all of you know, business aviation has been a leader. We're the part of the aviation industry where winglets were first introduced. We're the part of the industry where composite technologies were introduced. We're where GPS navigation was adopted. And the strides that we have been making for decades have been impressive. But because this is aviation, because this is business aviation, we're impatient. We want to go further and we want to go faster. And that's what this session is about. Further, faster, more sustainable aviation fuel that's going to propel us to the promises that we made to be reducing our carbon footprint in the not so distant future. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we thought we would do is use the opportunity to have these extraordinary individuals together and to have an interesting interview session where Raquel from NBAA TV is asking the industry leaders about a fuel that in many ways seems almost too good to be true, except it's not. Sustainable aviation fuel exists. It's Jet A. It's being demonstrated. It's being used. And it's one of the fundamental hallmarks of NBAA-BACE 2019. All of you may know that nearly all of the manufacturers have flown here utilizing sustainable aviation fuel. And everybody that takes on Jet A at Henderson is taking on sustainable aviation fuel. This is our future. This is our pathway. This is our commitment. And so we've assembled an extraordinary panel. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves. And when we get to Raquel, I'm going to have Raquel begin to ask some of the questions that are on the minds of the press these days about sustainable aviation fuel, where it is, what it means, and how we go forward. So let me begin by turning it over to the President and CEO of the General Aviation Manufacturers Association, my great friend and an industry leader, Pete Bunce.
Thank you, Ed. I just want to emphasize how this whole effort started by all of our aviation associations, not only here in the US, but our partners over in Europe, looked at this issue back in 2009. So this isn't a new journey that we have been on. We came up with a commitment to be able to move forward toward a more sustainable future in 2009. In 2017, a lot of that culminated with the establishment of a CO2 standard that applies to all aircraft. In fact, if you wanted to, this internationally accepted standard could be applied to automobiles if that was so elected to do so. So that was a very long process, but during that whole time, all the associations worked together to be able to come to where we are at this point in time of actuating on the pillars of advancing technology, being able to use new air traffic control methodology through NextGen and SISTAR as another pillar, and then the third one being this very, very important sustainable aviation fuel. And so it's a commitment that all of us have made, and I'm always excited to talk about it because this is our future. And quite frankly, if we don't get moving on this in the very near future, we're going to be overcome by events. And any of you that have been over to Europe know what's happening over there. So we as an industry have to collectively work this issue hard, but opportunity is in front of us.
I'm with Cox Enterprises out of Atlanta, Georgia. I'm the Vice President of Aviation, lead our aviation function. We operate a fleet of 5 Gulfstreams. We, Cox Enterprises is a company that's a private company, and our chairman and our CEO have called upon all executive leadership across the company to think of innovative ways to grow our company from a $22 billion company to a $60 billion company. And in that journey, they've asked us, not only do we want to grow revenue and grow our top line, but we want to do it in a very responsible way. So we've invested over $250 million in various projects. We bought a company called Clean Tech, and then when we work with another company in California called Carbon Lighthouse. And so when the call came down about growing the company but doing it in a very environmentally responsible way, there's not a lot of things that we feel you can do in aviation, but so I started doing some research with my team. So we were starting to have this conversation about SAF. And we started talking with Gulfstream and the manufacturers. This has been around for a long, long time, and the science is there. The legal is there, and it's all been, the traps have all been run very extensively. And so we've made a commitment. We're investing in SAF fuel. We're actually taking our first delivery of fuel December of this year. And so we're going to have our fleet will be, basically all of our home fuel will be carbon neutral. It's a 70-30 blend. So this was an opportunity when NBAA approached us about, it's about the education and being an operator and answering those questions. So happy to be here today and help answer everybody's questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Coleal, President of Bombardier Aviation. Bombardier Aviation is over an $8 billion company, one of the largest manufacturers of business aircraft, from Learjets to Challengers to Global. I also serve on the GAMA board as chairman of the environmental committee. So thank you all for being here. Very passionate topic for me as we think about the growing concern around the climate, and especially as we talk in the panel today about the importance of what we can do from a communication aspect. Our livelihood all relies on our ability to continue to grow this industry, and it's an amazing industry. And one thing I don't want to see is where we get bad perception about what we do. We create jobs, we create technology, we're enhancing the world, driving economic growth everywhere we go. So as we think about today, and as we talk more about what we can do, it's really about awareness building and the adoption of SAF, which we're very excited about. So thank you all for being here.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be in this convention. This is my first. And also to be able to participate in this panel. I'm the engineering leader for aviation fuels at GE Aviation, the largest engine manufacturer in history. And as you know, ultimately it is the engine companies that allow or disallow the use of a fuel in their equipment. So we are very much involved in the process. I am a part of the ASTM DO2 J1 subcommittee that develops and maintains jet fuel specifications. I'm also a part of the ASTM D4054 panel that essentially approves SAF. I also chair R&D team of CAFI, Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative Organization, and I'm a part of many other fuels-related committees. Apart from the specifications and the approvals, I have also held major roles in many commercial and military biofuel, sustainable fuel demonstrations, including the industry first commercial airline demonstration held by Virgin Atlantic, Boeing, and GE. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Gene Holloway. I'm the CSO and Executive Vice President for Environment and Sustainability for Aerion Supersonic. As many of you already know, we are not that far away from re-entering the supersonic civil aviation arena. As a groundbreaker, we believe that our company in particular is going to be out there looking to set a number of precedents as we begin to fly. And for that reason, we're working very closely with both the ICAO, the FAA, and also in particular with some of the SAF providers and distributors to look at how can we maximize our efforts in reducing our overall environmental footprint. We as a company are completely dedicated to that. We have a number of programs that we're instituting that are quite novel and first of their kind that will be associated with that. And hopefully we'll get a chance to mention a couple of those a little bit later on. But looking forward to participating in the panel today and appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kevin Welsh. I'm the Executive Director of FAA's Office of Environment and Energy. I'm really pleased to be here. And maybe just three things to kick things off, I think dovetailing with the other remarks. Number one, on sustainability. The U.S. aviation sector has a great track record of sustainability. Since 1991, the U.S. aviation system has improved its efficiency over 70%, 70% since 1991. That's a really impressive track record. Yet at the same time, the industry has committed to a very ambitious 2050 goal, which is to cut emissions 50% below 2005 levels. There's only so many ways to get there. And really, alternative fuels is going to play a major role in helping to achieve that goal, because there are limits on what we can expect from technology improvement, from operational improvement. And if we're not going to be buying offset credits from outside the sector, then alternative fuels are going to play a huge role in achieving that commitment and the sustainability. Number two, I think as it was said, there's a lot of history and work that's gone on this issue for many years already now. The Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative has been in place since 2006. Our Executive Director, Steve Zonka, is here. A lot of work has gone in to make sure these fuels are safe, to make sure there's pathways to make them viable. So we're talking about many years of work. And that brings me to the last point, which is kind of the commercial scale, right? We kind of going to what Ed said, there's a really interesting opportunity here with the business aviation sector to help send the demand signal to drive up the commercial scalability of these fuels. And that's really what we're focused on. And frankly, what the flights coming in and also departing here on sustainable alternative fuels, that's a really big deal. I don't know that it's getting enough attention as it should, but that's a really big deal and it's an important signal. And I hope we can have some conversation about how we can sort of use things like that to increase the momentum for the commercial scalability of these fuels. Thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you so much, gentlemen, for introducing yourself. What a panel do we have in store for you all today, right? Can I get a round of applause first for all of these men? Again, I'm Raquel Rodriguez. I'm an NBAA TV anchor and so happy to moderate this discussion with all of you. Sustainability has been a business aviation priority for many years, and the industry has a good story to tell. And it's more important than ever that we tell it, because the issue of aviation emissions has recently been driving global headlines. And to see what I'm talking about, we're going to toss to this video so you understand more. Take a look.
Came here on a zero emissions boat. Why didn't you fly to New York City?
Because I have, since a few years, stopped flying because of the enormous impact aviation has on the climate.
This is all wrong. You all come to us young people for hope. How dare you?
What do we want? Climate justice! What do we want?
All right, so some powerful statements there. So it's definitely in need that we have this conversation about the fuel that we're using today. So today's session is part of that conversation. It's called I Want My SAF, and here's why. We know that SAF is safe. We know that SAF is available, and we know that SAF is ready to use. So what's holding up the adoption and use? Today we're going to try and answer that question, but we also want you to be part of this conversation. So everybody take out your smartphone. Here we go. All right, so I want you to download the NBAA Events app to your cell phone. Once you all have that done, find our 2 p.m. session in the schedule. You're going to scroll on down, and you're going to click on the polling and question and answer section to participate. Now, if you're old school and don't want to download the app, just go and access our poll questions by going to nbaa.cnf.io in your phone's web browser. So there's a way to participate for everybody. So let's start with our first poll question. We're going to bring that up right now. And as you can see right behind me, it says we have a pressing concern when it comes to news coverage of business aviation and sustainability. Is that fair or unfair? So as you chime in, these will update in real time. So as you guys get that going, we're going to start off with some questions for our panelists as we see that fluctuate. So right now, it's at 94% fair, just to keep everybody aware. All right, so David, we are going to start with you. You are the president of Bombardier Aviation, the chair of Gamma. Oh, we'll get that mic over to you. There you go. You're also the chair of Gamma's Environment Committee, like you had said, and a leader in the SAF Industry Coalition. So I know sustainability is a huge issue for you both personally and professionally. 10 years ago, the business aviation community pledged to reduce CO2 emissions by 50% by 2050 relative to 2005. So where are we today, and what can we do to be better?
Thank you very much, Raquel. I think the video is very compelling, and people had asked me, do you feel it's fair or unfair? I'll be very concise. Yes and no. And what do I mean by that? As mentioned by the panel, this industry has had an amazing history, and you'll hear numbers between 40 and 70%, but 40% fuel efficiency over the last 40 years. Now, some numbers that's very important as we go through this, you have to socialize to make sure we're all on the same page. This industry, business and commercial aviation, is 2% of worldwide CO2 emissions, but business aviation is the 2% of 2%, 0.04%. 99.96% of emissions come from other industries. The thing that's great about this industry, the transport industry, we are the only one to have clear and measurable goals. We basically said carbon neutral by 2020 and 50% reduction in CO2 emissions by 2050. And we did it based on 4 initiatives. Technology, and you see it here. If you come out to our stack display, you'll see all the OEMs with the latest aircraft, latest innovations, latest announcement. We talked about market-based measures. We talked about next-gen operations for ATC. And finally, why we're here today, SAF. SAF is the key to this. Right now, it has real-time positive impact. Back in 2017, we issued a user guide and an information guide to let everybody in the world know this is ready, it's ASTM approved, and it's drop-in ready. And the way we did this, starting in January of 2019, we've had 3 fly-ins. The industry has collaborated together. We started out in Van Nuys, California. We had 3 OEMs flying there on SAF. We demonstrated 150 flights. It's the Business General Aviation Airport in California. We then all flew to Farnborough, England, did another event for our European colleagues to demonstrate the benefit of SAF as we flew into EBACE. And here we are today. This is the 3rd event in 2019 where this industry has got together to demonstrate real time that SAF is ready for use and ready for prime time. So the other benefit we're going to see is that when everybody leaves here today, they can leave Henderson Airport with SAF in their tank, which demonstrates to the world. So when you see Greta up there and all your votes were kind of the same, they were kind of spot on. It seems like it's fair, but we as an industry have to do a much better job of the awareness and the outreach on this. And then what it's going to come down to is making sure we can actually get it on the airport and get it in our customers' tanks. And all the OEMs are taking responsibility to do that. So when aircraft leaves my facility, when they come into my service center, I'm making sure SAF is going to get in their tanks. That's going to drive more demand, which is going to drive lower pricing. But we're on the cusp of making sure we can actually turn the tides and have real-time impact and having an immediate impact on CO2 emissions starting in 2020.
That is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. We're going to switch gears now, and next question is for you, Gurhan. It almost seems too good to be true. SAF is drop-in fuel that requires no modifications and actually improves performance. So can you confirm what we are hearing is true, and what, if any, impact does the fuel have on maintenance? Does it increase wear and tear?
Well, I confirm it, Raquel, that the drop-in fuels do not have any impact to the infrastructure or the engine or the airframe. They are kerosene, hydrocarbons. In fact, that's why we pursued drop-in fuels in the first place. If a fuel is not drop-in, if it is something else, then you need to go and recertify every engine model and every airframe model again for that non-drop-in fuel. SAF is a drop-in fuel. It's kerosene, hydrocarbons, maybe with some variation within the kerosene Jet A1 space, but it's really not another fuel. The end product is the same. You know, we talk about alternative fuels, right? The SAF, or the drop-in fuel, is not alternative with respect to the end product. That is equivalent to Jet A1. What's alternative is the feedstock that is non-petroleum, and also some of the steps that are used in the process pathway to get to Jet A1. That's what's alternative. Okay, so more discerning audience here might ask the question, hold on a minute, if it is the same with Jet A1, what is this notion about better performance? If the fuel is the same, wouldn't the performance be the same? But if you notice, I said there is some variation within kerosene. So some of these fuels could be slightly different than a nominal jet fuel. And in the case of most of the sustainable alternative fuels we approved, the aromatic levels tend to be lower. The result of that is a lighter fuel, lighter aircraft, and the fuel benefits. Also, the energy content of the fuel tends to be higher. For the same flight, less amount of fuel used, fuel burn benefits. Also, because of the reduced amount of aromatics, the combustion products are more favorable, especially with respect to particulates, smoke, contrails, and maybe sulfurous compounds. And of course, the CO2 benefit that was already talked about over the life cycle of the fuel. Now, regarding wear and tear, there is no such concern. In the conventional fuel specifications, for example, we don't have any requirement on lubricity, but for the synthetic fuel specification, for example, we put in a requirement for lubricity. So an adequate level of lubricity is maintained, and the fuel-wetted moving parts like the pumps and some elements of the fuel control systems are not negatively impacted with respect to life and maintenance. Again, for example, trace metal content in the fuel that can interact with combustion products, become something corrosive in the hot section. There is no requirement in the conventional fuel specifications, but we implemented metal content requirements, in fact, for 22 of them in the synthetic fuel specification. So there's no concern, Raquel, in terms of wear and tear either.
Very good to hear. And so again, we're hearing that SAF is safe, it's available, it's ready to use. So let's go to the next poll question, because what is the most pressing issue then that's delaying the use of SAF? Is it the cost? Is it the availability? Is it the awareness? So tune in right now and go into your mobile app and go ahead and take that poll. So right now, everyone, it looks like 56%, 51%, it's going fluctuating there. It's real-time data. Everyone's looking at availability. That's kind of what they're seeing right now. So I'm actually going to turn it over now to John with Cox to talk to me a little bit more about the fact that people think it's availability. But I'm also hearing that SAF costs more than non-sustainable aviation fuel. Would some operators be willing to pay a premium for SAF?
Very good, Raquel. And when I started in this journey, one thing I remembered was I wish I'd paid better attention in high school chemistry. But once I did get beyond the science and the understanding it, and we started this journey, availability is there, but demand is what's going to drive availability. It costs hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to build these refineries. Currently, all SAF fuel available today is manufactured by World Energy in California, and it's shipped all around the country, all the way to Montreal, all the way to Savannah today via rail. And that's where the cost is a big part of it, is because of the logistics and the supply chain getting it across the country. So that's driving some of the price. But I've talked with several fuel providers, and they've gone back to the refineries, and the refineries will make the investment. They know right now they're doing a lot of biodiesel but they're willing to make these investments if the demand is there. So, you know, at Cox, we made a commitment. We did make a fiscal dedication to do this. I'm not going to say there is a rumor that it's 7 times more. That is false. We are not seeing that in our pricing model, and it's about, you know, being at the tip of the spear and leading by example. So as I mentioned earlier, we're willing to step out. We understand the science. We understand that the zero risk involved, and put our money where our mouth is, more or less. And so I've been telling our story. We're sharing it. I think we've got some other companies that are going to jump on board with us in the Atlanta area. So that's exciting. And so it was 50-50 from price and awareness. And that's what we're here, is to spread the story. And you know, I used the example of when someone was asking, it was like GPS approaches. When they first came out, people were not aware. And we had the conversation about, you know, navigating laterally and vertically off the satellites via ground-based systems. This is the same thing. You know, the technology is there, it's proven, and once we, you know, all the manufacturers, Bombardier and Gulfstream, are demonstrating it for many years now. So it's the awareness, we're telling the story. The price is not 7 times more. It is a little bit more, yes, but the demand, the availability will drive the price down.
Absolutely, and everyone's heard a lot of chatter about SAF this week. So Pete, I'm going to turn it over to you now. So while you've been on the show floor this week, you've heard a lot of commentary from your OEM members about SAF. What are they telling you?
Well, I think from a standpoint of the OEMs, they're so far ahead of the ball game here. David has done just yeoman's work on our environmental committee, rallied all the manufacturers to get together and accept this, and we started this a long time ago. So it's not about the OEMs. Quite frankly, I have to tell you, I'm very disappointed, right, in the aviation press, because I think that when you look at how those factors interplay, right there, it's the awareness that is going to drive the demand, which has an impact on availability, which in supply and demand is then going to have an impact on price. It all comes down to awareness. And when you've got every single one of the manufacturers, the jet manufacturers, up on stage, along with engine manufacturers and all the associations yesterday, and it doesn't make a big deal in the trade press, you go, what's going on here? So quite frankly, I am disappointed, because we have to get the word out, because this is so darn important to our industry. And we know there are customers out there that want it. And we've got partners like Steve Zonka here with the CAFE program, who's ready to help us then work with the military and also with our commercial brethren to be able to go and expand the pool out there to, again, drive supply and demand. So there is absolutely a firm commitment by all the manufacturers, as has been mentioned. We don't have to recertify. There's a lot of questions that are being asked about, you know, well, is it really safe in that aircraft? This is Jet A. It is a drop-in. So what we have to do is we have to get people to tell their FBOs, I want this. And that gets transmitted to our fuel suppliers that know how to do it, that transmit it to the refiners. Refiners all of a sudden say, okay, I got demand out there. I'm going to start investing. I'm going to bring in investors that'll give us the money to be able to make money off of selling this fuel. And ultimately, then the price is going to come down. So we as an industry have a lot of work to do.
Yes, and let's get that hashtag spreading, I want my SAF. Members of the press, make sure you're writing this up, getting it out to everybody to spread the awareness. You can actually also watch an NBAA TV package that we did on sustainability, talking about how all the planes came in with SAF and they're flying out on SAF. So I definitely recommend you all sharing that out as well. So Kevin, we're going to come to you next. Tell us why SAF is more environmentally friendly, and what are the expected SAF efficiencies and associated life cycle emissions in terms of CO2 reduction?
Okay, so how long do you have for that answer?
We'll give you 4 minutes.
No, I won't try and take up that much time, but I think this is, of course, you know, we've been talking at a very high level. One very important question is, what are the emissions benefits of sustainable alternative fuels? And of course, different pathways are going to lead to different results. So one very important piece of work that's happening right now, and it's work that we at FAA are working with industry internationally at ICAO to determine what the life cycle emissions benefits are and to get international agreement. Because that's going to be a really important part of the solution, is both to have buy-in internationally for an agreed standard so that you know if you're using a particular sustainable alternative fuel, what the actual emissions benefit is. At the same time, so there's a lot of work that's going on to do that. And at the same time, of course, if you're buying this jet fuel and you're paying a premium for it, and you're advertising to the public or your customers, et cetera, that you're using this fuel and you're getting a benefit, you need to have a mechanism to show what the emissions benefits that you have achieved are. So that's also integral to the work. So, you know, in short, I don't think there's a clear answer at the moment for any particular fuel, and it really depends. The fuel could be, you know, as little as you know, 10 to 15% better than conventional petroleum, you know, up to kind of, you know, fully beneficial. So it's really something that we're continuing to work on, and of course is a really important part of the puzzle.
Okay, let's switch gears now, and we're going to go over to Gene. So Gene, you said for some time that from the time your Supersonic jet starts conducting test flights, you plan to make SAF a part of those flights. So please elaborate on your thinking in this regard.
Well, thank you. Okay, so let me back up just a little bit, okay, because it really kind of comes down to, in many respects, the first question you posed about the fairness of the coverage. And it's not really about fairness. And the other panel members have kind of addressed it a little bit as well. At Aerion, we have a corporate culture that's committed to the environment. It's a different situation. We are a startup, you know, unlike, we're populated with a lot of very senior people from the industry, but we're bringing all the things that we've learned over our vast careers to the table here. And one of the ones that stands out is that, you know, we have a firm commitment to be good environmental custodians, you know, to do everything we can, as I said earlier, to try to minimize our impact on the environment. And so as part of that, you know, we're not only building our company in a way that is focused on the whole manufacturing and design process to be green and you know, from that standpoint, but also moving into the design of the aircraft, and that we are designing the airplane to be ready on day one of delivery, such that our aircraft is fully compatible with flying on 100% synthetic fuel. That means we're working with our partners at GE, for example, to make sure that all the engines, the APUs, the fuel systems, the whole you know, fuel train is all set up to receive 100% synthetic fuels, as well as you could also fly the airplane on 100% fossil-based. So it's in car terms, it's a flex fuel, you know, vehicle. All right, so there's our airplane's design. Now we also obviously have to go prove that. That's where the flight test comes in. And so we have a 5 aircraft flight test program that we've put together, and we're looking to spread that in a little different way. So our first 2 airplanes will probably fly on fossil fuel because it'll be the proper thing to do at the time. But then by the time we get to our 3rd aircraft, we're looking at starting to fly all of the flight test hours for that airplane on, say, a 30-70 blend. And for the 4th aircraft, it'll all be done on a 50-50 blend. And for the 5th aircraft, it'll all be done on 100%. So by the time we're done, we'll have this 5,000 flight hour test program on the same type airplane with the same engine that is looked at all the different types of fuels that could go into it. You know, and that's something that we want to share with the world. We don't believe it's something we need to keep on our own, keep proprietary. We think it is key in helping to move forward the availability of SAF worldwide. And so there will be a number of things we talked about early on that, you know, we're going to be doing a lot of groundbreaking as we move forward. This is an opportunity for us to embrace the spotlight that's been put on business aviation in particular, and begin to talk more and more about all the things that we're doing from a positive fashion. David mentioned things that you know, Bombardier's been doing and others have been doing. Those are all actions in terms of educating and re-educating people out there, because one of the biggest challenges that we have in moving forward with the...
We've been talking about the availability in the market, a bit of the pricing mechanisms, and if we're able to supply more because there's more demand, then the price will obviously decrease, which is all fine. What I would be interested to hear is what the panel believes about the geographical spread of the availability. We're now confronted with just a couple of uplift possibilities across the world, and I think if you want to be credible as an industry in being able to uplift this everywhere, there is a geographical challenge to be overcome as well. What would the panel think about that? Thanks.
Who would like to start with that one? Go for it, Gene.
That's a great question. And it's one that we've spent a good bit of time thinking about because, you know, we would like, obviously, for our jet to be operated exclusively on 100% synthetic. So that makes the widespread availability just that much more critical for us, right? And so what we've done in our own analysis is to look at, you know, over time, what are the key centers where, for example, our jet will be operating, you know, out of. And so those are the ones that we would target initially to try to work with the governments, work with the FBOs, the fuel providers to ensure that those locations have the availability of the fuel. Obviously, as I mentioned previously, our jet is completely agnostic to the type of fuel that goes into it. So, you know, at other points where you fly, you know, if you end up starting with 100% biofuel, you know, when you took off, and you land someplace where all you've got is you know, a standard fossil fuel, the expectation is that you don't have to go purge your tanks or anything else. You add the normal or the fossil-based fuel to your jet, and then you keep going from there. You just wind up with a blend of some sort. But you know, the key is finding where the places to start. You know, to start focusing on it, and the more we make it available in certain areas, then we're hoping the wider spread it'll become.
At Gamma, we have the luxury of having actually 3 fuel suppliers in Gamma between AvFuel, World Fuel, and Epic. And in fact, Craig Sincock and Mike Shikosh back in the back here. And one thing they have taught me a lot about is just how this whole ecosystem of fuel distribution, whether you ship it, you truck it, you rail it, has great impact along with local taxes on what we all pay out there. So right now, the west coast of the United States, there are tax incentives out there that allow for some of the production there. But again, here in North America, as we start to build up our demand for this, then they get to do their magic to be able to talk to the many refiners that they deal with around and be able to convince them to start producing this fuel because they know they can sell it. So that is a very established, well-ingrained system. In Europe, Attar, you know, he has been working and looking at with the fuel distributors in Europe at where it's produced in Neste up in Scandinavia, and how again they can start expanding the amount of refiners that make that available, make the transportation costs easier, that again bring down the price. So, but our fuel distributors know how to do this. Our job as an aviation community is to say, we want it. They will figure out how to get the refiners to be able to produce it for us and be able to spread that out in more geographic areas to make it more economical.
And if I can, you need to think about also planes are mobile. So with the concentration of fuel being available kind of in North America and in Europe to begin with, a plane from Southeast Asia or Latin America that makes its way to the US that does maintenance, it can fly back on SAF. So you're going to get translated benefits automatically, even if you don't have geographical concentration to begin with, but it will come over time. And that's the beauty of our industry, is because planes, they fly around the world, and with our aircraft getting longer and longer legs, they have the ability to actually pick up fuel anywhere, and most likely they will, somebody at some point in time will be on SAF, even if their home country may not have it to initially begin with.
Let me just quickly add to this something else that's a little bit different. That's the CORSIA agreement. Some of you might be familiar with this. This is the first of its kind. It's carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation. It's first of its kind in the sense that it is global, and I think it will help the globalization or uniformization of the adoption of SAF globally. It will make it attractive for the operators to adopt SAF globally. So it's another element to consider, I think, in this equation.
All right. We're going to move on to another audience question I'm hearing. I think they're going to put it up on the screen momentarily. Oh, we're having some mic issues over there. All right, well, while that's getting taken care of, let's move on to another question that you all can answer. So how can these people in the audience, everybody here, say to fuel producers and distributors in the US and around the world, I want my SAF? Who wants to take that first? Don't all jump at once. Yeah, for sure. How can the people in the audience say to fuel producers and distributors in the US and around the world, I want my SAF? How can they say that message to them?
You know, we were talking actually, you know, it's in Pete, it was very eloquent about it. I mean, it starts off, the refiners have a choice of how they vector their fuel supplies. So, you know, the awareness we're building is super important. FBOs have a choice, you know, to, you know, make sure they ask for it. OEMs, we've done our part. We are drop-in ready. We've committed. We're flying. So this, in my mind, is really about, you know, even large corporations like myself making the initial investment and demonstrating. And all of you work for large companies. You can actually, you know, make this part of, you know, some of your dialogues with your companies, which this has a groundswell. So it's, you know, all of us working together, because this isn't something we have to wait 20 years for. That's the beauty of this. And it's something that's, you know, usually unheard of, you know, because most of the time you'd be up here talking about, you know, the future and so forth. But the fact that this is available now, and when you think about the objective we made, 50% reduction in CO2 emissions by 2050, the way we get there is by the full adoption of the fleet of SAF over a duration of time. So, you know, all of you play a role. Don't think that you don't. If you're in a big corporation, you know, ask your company, ask your executives, hey, have you heard about this? What are you doing about this? Are we flying on this? When you go to the FBO, ask them at the counter, hey, do you have this on the field yet? And, you know, even for my employees, you know, I'll go back and I brief them on what we're doing on SAF. And so this is all something you have a very visible hand in shaping, and it's not something that, you know, you don't play a part in if you don't think that you do.
Nope, Pete.
I would just add, one of my friends has 3 FBOs in a state. He told me that he had a company come up and say, we want it. How do we get it in the tanks? And without having to build another tank, he said, well, we can order truckloads of it if you're willing to pay. And the company said, you'll get it blended. It'll just go into the Jet A stream. Everybody can use it, but I want to take credit for buying those 4 truckloads and be able to do it that way. So there's a lot of ways that we're starting to hear that companies can do it. And what is encouraging to me is this is going to really start in business aviation, because business aviation will look at this and say, I want my fleet and I want to be able to say we're sustainable, and then I will go be able to find the mechanisms through our fuel distributors to be able to make it happen. And there's many different ways that all can come about.
Bringing the mic over to Kevin now with the FAA.
What I'd like to just add, you know, and we haven't gotten too much into it, but is what, you know, what are the incentives that are out there for SAF? And so we heard a little bit about California, right, where there's clearly some incentives right now. There's also incentives under the renewable fuel standard, and also this program, this carbon offset program internationally, will actually help send a price signal for alternative fuels, because if you use alternative fuels in lieu of petroleum fuels, the obligations that will be required under that program will be commensurately lowered. So there's a number of things, but I think if folks are interested in this and thinking about how to advocate for it, certainly there's a discussion to be had at the federal level and the state level about what kind of incentives for aviation can be put in place for sustainable alternative fuels. A lot of road transport, there's alternatives, non-petroleum based alternatives that they can look into. In the near term, we just simply don't see that for aviation. So there's arguably a case that there's a greater need for some kind of incentives for aviation biofuels.
Anyone else?
I'd just add that, you know, it also becomes a matter of trying to turn the conversation a little differently. You know, we have, you know, folks like Greta's an amazing young woman. She's been able to energize the world, really, and behind her. But, it also comes back to us individually as we talk to people. Help them understand. Don't always think in terms of what goes on between the tank and the tailpipe. Start thinking more about what is it that we could do, as I say, well to wake. Okay, how is it that we can become carbon neutral, just by, the types of fuels we use, and then go beyond that? I mean, what are the other things that we could take individually and as companies within the industry to set the example for others to start doing this? And and that's one of the key things. Become an activist in your own way. Turn the tables so that now what the news, if you feel it's unfair to you currently, is saying, find a way to turn it around so that they begin to hear the story in a different light.
And then I think Gurhan.
Raquel, I will shamelessly but kindly tweak your question a little bit.
Okay.
Your question was, what can the audience say to the producers and the distributors? I think the question should be, what can the audience say to the operators and the producers? Because that's where the rubber meets the road and SAF meets the aircraft. Ultimately, it's the operators demanding the fuel that will drive the producers to produce. Okay, we understand the cost challenge, but I think the audience will need to make a plea with the operators that they, even now, in a great convention like this, here and now, vigorously explore collaborations, operator and the producer, offtake agreements, or anything of that sort.
Absolutely. All right, I think we have another audience question. I'm going to toss it over there.
Thanks, Raquel. I'm Dan. Hi, everybody. I'm Dan with NBAA. Sorry a minute there ago, had a bum mic. Anyway, we're getting several good questions, so thanks to everybody for your participation. Why don't I start with the top question we're getting, which is a kind of half step back and a basic question, but one that really might help our audience and others. What are the primary sources for SAF, and how sustainable are those? Maybe, Kevin, since you deal with this every day, it would probably be best if, this could be something in layman's terms. If you walked up to a neighbor and they wanted to ask about it, what would you tell them?
Can I phone a friend on this one? I actually would, if I don't mind handing it over to Steve Sonka.
Sure.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Steve Zonk, I'm the Executive Director of CAFI, the Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative. We actually discussed this in the previous session. We had a luncheon today. I set that up by saying I was particularly grieved by a headline that I saw within the last 2 weeks where someone pointedly said that in 2050, aviation will be responsible for massive deforestation. And that's absolutely so far from the direction that we're working toward. It's incredible. So what I put on the slide this morning was, in my area of focus, which is North America, we're talking about 27 billion gallons of jet fuel annually used. Commercial, business, military, special purpose. If I look at the feedstock kinds of programs that we're looking at, and I just tally up the top seven waste streams that we're working with, those tally up to about 58% of our demand. And those are all the areas where we're focused on. So wet waste, forestry residuals, ag waste, fats, oils, and greases, etc. So that's where we have the focus. And part of the reason that we have the focus there is because waste feedstock streams actually are lower cost and can help us with this challenge that we have on price. So that's where we're focused. We're not shying away from purpose-grown scenarios. So I can get to about 16 billion gallons or so from those waste streams. And by the way, that doesn't say that all of that fuel comes to us. There's a natural distribution there when you look at the physics of the processes. Some of that goes to the diesel portion, diesel fraction. Some of it comes to jet. Some of it goes to gasoline. So I'm just accounting for the standard conversion processes, the efficiency levels of those processes, and what fraction of that would come to jet. So about 16 billion gallons. Then I look at some purpose-grown scenarios, especially in the US, again, where I'm focused, where we can develop significant purpose-grown crops without indirect land use. And I'll give you 2 good examples, and I suspect 1 or 2 of these folks actually might be in the audience. We're looking at some oilseed development, and these are oilseeds that, believe it or not, actually grow over the winter time, where millions of acres are fallow right now. So I've got a couple special ones that I talk about all the time. I've actually gotten a moniker for the fact that I support pennycress, but I'm familiar with it because it's grown in my home region. So we grow about 80 million acres of corn and soy today in a rotation across the Midwest. I can actually plant pennycress between the harvest of corn and the sowing of soybeans. And that one crop alone can easily reach 3 to 4 billion gallons of fuel production. It's a very similar scenario with Carinata in the Southeast. Same kind of process. The only reason that it's a different crop is because it's not as cold tolerant as pennycress is in the Midwest. So there's several solutions like that. And then getting into purpose-grown forestry, coppice crops, halophyte plants, which are salt-tolerant plants. I mean, the list really goes on. And those are things that I know I can work with today. And then in the future, I have the promise for things like algae and some things that are a little bit further out on the horizon. And a huge effort right now, surprise, this past week in Germany, their focus is really skipped ahead a decade, and they're looking at power to liquid fuels. So it's basically using renewable energy and doing a direct conversion of water to hydrogen and point CO2 sources to carbon and putting those back together to form a fuel, and sort of sky's the limit with that kind of approach. So a lot of opportunities with a lot of approaches that are going to be extremely sustainable and are not impacting this issue of food versus fuel, water usage, et cetera.
Well, it looks like we have about 5 minutes left, so I want the panelists to be able to take some time here and give us some lasting thoughts that you want to leave this audience with on I Want My SAF. So Pete, if you want to start us off, and we'll just go down the row.
Well, I think as all of us do a lot of work, and of course we have IBEC that's up at Montreal for us. If anybody saw the pictures of the recent ICAO assembly and looked at the main street that runs right in front of ICAO and seeing 100,000 people marching together with concerns about the climate, which we all share, you know, you really get a sobering view of what we have to do as an industry to get ahead of this. But we have opportunity, just as Steve was just talking about. You know, we can leverage off what's happening with the auto industry, and a lot of that effort that's happening in Europe about pulling CO2 and everything is led by our brethren that are in the auto industry. So with this focus on the environment comes opportunity for us as an industry. And I think as we look also to the electrification, all these vehicles that are displayed out here, that's going to complement what we're trying to do with SAF. So the opportunity that we have as an industry, again, the key is to be able to educate, to be able to tell people, and everybody is here because they care about this issue, go out and tell people, you can get it today. Start asking for it, and we can shape our own future.
One thing when I was beginning to prepare to think about what to talk about today, and I met with, he's actually over here, Charles Etter with Gulfstream, and he pointed something out really important, and that is, this is a global issue. This isn't domestically here in the United States. And, you know, the way that the atmosphere works is when the CO2 is emitted and it goes into the air, while the jet streams and the trade winds, it surrounds the entire globe. And Europe is much more further advanced than we are here in the United States around environmental initiatives and manufacturing, production, and everything. They walk a lot more, ride their bikes, electric cars, and so on and so forth. But you know, it's like dropping a gallon of chlorine in the ocean. Well, eventually it's going to dilute itself around the entire globe. And so I think we here in the U.S., if we take we're the most advanced aviation country in the world, and so if we take a real big swing at this and really get out in front of it. United Airlines has been doing this for a while already, and in business aviation, We take our own punches in the press already. So if we can punch back, if you will, and tell our story about, well, we are environmentally conscious. As David indicated, we've got the technology, we've got the innovation, we've got the resources to do this. And so if we can tell our story and counter, some of those attacks, then it's going to soften, then people will realize that, we do have responsible companies, we do have responsible operators, and we're trying to make a difference. And being the largest aviation society in the world, it's going to affect globally, not just here in the United States.
Yeah, I think for me, what's exciting is, use the term meaningful change. And I don't say that lightly. When we all reflect back on the work we do in our careers, this is a turning point for us. And if you think about moving into 2020, the next decade, what the next 10 years can hold for us and what we can do to positively impact, the environment, we have just this golden opportunity. And I think we should all embrace this, from a passionate perspective. We're all part of a very small planet. The world gets smaller, as they say. So this is something I would hate for us to kind of pass by when you hear about some of the things on the horizon. We have a real opportunity to make meaningful change, be impactful, and show the world, not just our industry, but show the world how an industry can collectively come together and have meaningful change.
I think the so-called 4 pillars of sustainability, all of them will be important and all of them will be a part of the solution. The advancements in technology, fuel efficiency, engine efficiency improvements, airframe efficiency improvements in the longer run, novel technologies, electric, hybrid electric, improvements in operational efficiencies, shorter landing times, direct routing, single engine taxiing, electrical ground equipment, advancements in infrastructure, modernization of air traffic control. All of these will play a role, but they will not get us to where we want to be at, neither at 2035 nor at 2050 or beyond. We need SAF. So what we need to do is to consider SAF at this point, not as an alternative, but as an imperative for a sustainable future. So we want our SAF.
I was just kind of echoing the sentiments down the line, though. This is an exciting time for our industry. There's a lot of opportunities out there that have not been there for a while, and there's a lot of technologies that are beginning to coalesce that have been needed to make, significant strides towards achieving these various goals. Fuels is one key one. As we move forward, we recognize, for our size aircraft, electrification is not going to come for a long time. The energy densities are not there, so we need to be looking at what are the things we can do, in terms of the fuels that we have now. The research that we need to do into advanced fuels even downstream. But it all comes from making those concentrated steps forward at this point to start changing the way we look at our fuels, and that starts with, I want my SAF.
All right, I see I'm out of time. This is a really hopeful conversation and inspiring for me. I've spent over the last decade really focused on the emissions part and the climate part, and negotiating the CORSIA and seeing alternative fuels as a piece. But as I said at the outset, aviation plays such an important role economically, not just in North America and in Europe, but really around the world, and in particular in developing countries where they fundamentally see aviation as part of their pathway to development, right? So if we're going to solve this problem, then alternative fuels really have to be a source of it. And what's inspiring about this conversation, hearing from manufacturers, John hearing from an operator, hearing from people that have made serious commitments to this and are bringing a company perspective to do this, there's a real great opportunity. And I think it really is an inflection point. So I think it's an exciting time. And I'm looking to think about how we go from the 1 million gallons that were produced last year to the 1 billion gallons that will be produced, within the next 10. So really hopeful.
Yes, very exciting time to be in business aviation. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being part of this lively discussion. And thank you for listening. And let's go out there and spread the message. I want my SAF. Thank you, everybody.